I'm Susan Barton, the founder of Bright Solutions for Dyslexia. When Kelly Shaner shared the list of questions you had, I realized I would not be able to answer some of them because I am not a professional advocate and I am not an education rights attorney. Even then, there were way more questions than I could answer in an hour. So I picked out 15 questions to answer on a wide variety of topics. The first one is about advice for parents. The first question was, if you could only give 5 pieces of advice to a parent who has a child who's having difficulty with reading or spelling, what would that advice be? The most important thing is to get your child the right type of tutoring immediately, even if you have to pay for it yourself and do it after school. Don't wait for the school to provide it. The second thing is fight for accommodations in the classroom at school. The third piece of advice would be start providing accommodations during homework time immediately to cut homework time in half and get rid of the tears and frustration. Number 4, explain dyslexia to your child. Number 5, get and start teaching them how to use technology tools effectively. But there's a lot more detail behind each of those pieces of advice, and I have even more advice. In fact, I encourage you to watch my video called 9 Things Parents Should Do. A link to that free video is in the handout for this presentation. The next question had to do with attention deficit disorder. The second question was, do we know how often a student is diagnosed with ADHD, but the dyslexia is overlooked, or vice versa? How often do students have both? It is very common for students to have both dyslexia and ADD. Sadly, many schools and even some parents blame everything on ADD and don't look to see if there might be more going on. The research shows that at least 40% of the kids with dyslexia also have ADD or ADHD to some degree. If you're concerned about that with your child, watch my 10-minute video chat called ADD, Dyslexia, or Both. The link to that video chat is on my handout. The next question had to do with reading versus spelling. The question was, is it possible for a student who is an excellent speller to have dyslexia? No, not if they spell well when writing compositions, and they're not trying to dumb down their words so that they only include short, simple words they know how to spell. So if they can spell anything they can say confidently and accurately, they don't have dyslexia. But kids with dyslexia can do okay on the weekly spelling test if a parent spent hours and hours practicing those words, yet they won't be able to spell them 2 weeks later. Dyslexia always impacts spelling, especially when you have to write sentences and stories and compositions. Then the question asked, how about a fluent reader who is a poor speller and writer? Could that student have dyslexia? Yes, especially if they're in the elementary school years, kindergarten through 5th grade. Kids with dyslexia are smart, and they can fake it for a while in reading, but they can't fake it in spelling. Dyslexia always has a huge impact on spelling. The next question has to do with testing. The next question was, can you explain which tests a school psychologist could use to tease out the signs and symptoms of dyslexia versus some other reading problem? Are there any tests that should always be included when checking for dyslexia? Yes, when checking for dyslexia, they should always use the CTOP, CTOP is an acronym that stands for Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing. It checks for phonemic awareness, rapid naming, word retrieval, and auditory memory size. In addition, a school psychologist should always give an in-depth test of decoding single and multisyllable nonsense words, have students read real words in a list, and do an in-depth spelling test. My favorite test for all three of those skills is the WIST, which stands for Word Identification and Spelling Test. But there are many other norm standardized tests that check those same skills. In addition, the school psychologist should check for fluency, which means speed and accuracy, in decoding and recognizing real words, such as the test of word reading efficiency. They should also check for reading accuracy, speed, and comprehension in grade level passages, using a test such as the Gray Oral Reading Test. A test of written composition, including fluency, should also be included. School psychologists should check for math, accuracy, and fluency. If a parent is worried about dysgraphia, they should ask an occupational therapist to be included and check for it. And if there are signs of oral language concerns, a parent should ask for a speech-language evaluation that includes at least the CELF, C-E-L-F, which stands for Comprehensive Evaluation of Language Fundamentals, as well as the Goldman-Fristow Test of Articulation. The next question had to do with homeschooling. I get asked quite a bit about homeschooling. Your questions included, you support parents who choose homeschooling for students with dyslexia. Of those who elect to homeschool, do most of them report that their child progresses well? Yes. Is there a person you recommend for assisting a parent find appropriate homeschool curriculum? Yes. How does homeschooling work? Are there any special considerations we should take into account before tackling homeschooling? Oh, yes. Homeschooling is a huge undertaking. It's a major commitment for a parent because now they have to be both parent and full-time teacher, and they often have no teaching experience. But you know what? Many parents are already spending their evenings reteaching everything the teacher tried to teach during the day, but your child did not understand. So don't be afraid of homeschooling. Homeschooling can be a wonderful option, a way to give your child a year or two to catch up while getting the right type of instruction during the school day, instead of after school when they're exhausted. And they have time to catch up without embarrassment or humiliation by other kids noticing what they cannot do. And you know what? There's no homework in homeschool. When you're done for the day, you're done. You no longer have to spend your evenings fighting and struggling over homework. And you can accomplish more in 3 or 4 hours of one-on-one at home in a quiet environment than a teacher can accomplish standing in front of 30 students in 7 hours. That means your child will have time to play, time to be a kid, time to develop their gifted areas. But homeschooling is not right for everyone. Probably the most important thing to think about is, do you and your child work well together? And do you have the discipline to keep with it and do it every day? Now, since it is such a big question, I do have a couple of videos that I encourage you to watch if you're thinking about homeschooling. I have them listed on the handout. One is it time to change schools? That short live video chat goes into your 4 schooling options, because homeschooling is not your only option if you're tired of the public school system. And then I have a separate 30-minute video called Homeschooling Using the Barton System. It's also for those who are thinking about homeschooling. And it goes into, what do you do about the other curriculum? Who are good homeschools consultants for curriculum? And many, many other things. So I hope you'll watch it if you're thinking about homeschooling. The next question had to do with hiring a private tutor. There were several questions that came in about hiring a private tutor. The first one was, how can I find a certified Barton tutor? All you have to do is send me an email, send it to susan@bartonreading.com, and ask for a list of tutors. Be sure to tell me your city and state. The next question was, what are some questions every parent should ask before hiring any tutor to work with their dyslexic child? On the handout, I include a link to a list of questions you should ask any tutor before you hire them, such as, do you use an Orton-Gillingham system? Which one? Are you certified in it? How long have you been tutoring? What's your background? And so on. Another question regarding tutoring or intervention from the school was, can you explain what fidelity means regarding interventions, and how can a parent ensure that their child is getting it? With fidelity means a school is doing the program as required by the developer of that program. It means the teacher was properly trained in the program. The group size is correct. The intensity, which means the number of minutes each week, is correct. The teacher is doing all the steps in the lesson plans, and so on. On the handout, I've included a link to the Barton Fidelity Checklist. But if your child is getting tutoring in a different Orton-Gillingham system, contact the developer of that system. They should be able to provide you with a similar fidelity checklist. The next question has to do with which reading programs work. The next question was, which of the programs listed below are research or evidence-based programs proven as effective interventions for children with dyslexia? And the list was long. Here's what I recommend. Please watch my 6-minute video chat called Reading Programs That Work. I mention programs by name that will and will not work for students known or suspected of having dyslexia. And a link to that video is in the handout. After you watch it, you're welcome to send me an email asking for research on any of the programs mentioned in that video. The next question was about response to intervention, RTI. The question was, what are the shortcomings and advantages of the response to intervention model, often called RTI? Boy, I see lots of problems with RTI. The theory of it sounds wonderful, and on paper it sounds terrific. But the problems are how it's implemented, which varies tremendously from school to school. One problem I see is what program is used for RTI. Tier 1 is the regular program used in the classroom by the regular education teacher. If your scores are showing you're not progressing, they move you into Tier 2, but sadly, Tier 2 is often the very same program, just more of it. It's called double dipping. So you may get the same program for 20 minutes 2 or 3 times a week in a slightly smaller group, maybe a group of 10 to 12 kids. But if the program isn't working for you, then getting more of it's not going to help. Now, if you fail to make progress in Tier 2, they'll eventually move you to Tier 3, and that's usually when the reading specialist is allowed to use a different program and work in very small groups or one-on-one. That's often when the Barton reading and spelling system is brought in. But look how long you have to wait and fail before you get there. Another problem I see with RTI is, how is progress measured? Scores can go up, but never rely on scores, guys. Always ask for the percentile, because the raw score may go up, but the percentile, which shows how he's doing compared to the other kids, may actually be going down, which means that your child is getting further behind. So when they give you progress reports and scores, always ask to see the percentiles. If the percentiles are not going up, your child is getting further behind. And then the last problem I see with RTI is when a child does make some progress, the intervention is stopped. Yet it was that special type of instruction that was causing the scores to go up. And in my opinion, that means he needs more of it, not to have it stopped. In the handout, I've included a link to a large RTI study that was published in Education Week, which shows that students who got RTI actually performed worse over time than their peers who had the same low scores but never got RTI. I also have a link to the RTI page of the Wright's Law website, which has lots more useful information on it. The next question had to do with light sensitivity. The question was, what causes the words to wiggle or bounce on a page or a computer screen? If that is happening, it's a symptom of something called light sensitivity. Most students with dyslexia do not have light sensitivity, but a few have both conditions. And by the way, you can also have light sensitivity and not be dyslexic. If you want more information on light sensitivity, which is sometimes called Irlen syndrome or scotopic sensitivity, then go to www.irlensyndrome.org. And that link is in the handout for this presentation. The next question had to do with IEP goals and strategies. The question was, what are the most important goals that should be included in my child's IEP? What parents need to understand is the testing done by the school psychologist must prove there's a need, and then the need drives the goals, and the goals drive the services. So that's why it's so important to make sure they test deeply in every area that you suspect is being impacted by their dyslexia. The question continues, what resources would you recommend for a parent who suspects or has just found out that their child has dyslexia to prepare them for their IEP meeting in order to effectively and appropriately advocate on their child's behalf? Boy, that's a huge one. The best book out there that I've ever read on that is a book by Dr. Kelly Sandman Hurley called Dyslexia Advocate: How to Advocate for a Child with Dyslexia Within the Public Education System. It's available on Amazon.com, and there's a link to that on my handout. But please know, it is so very hard for a parent to learn IEP law fast enough and to remain unemotional enough to be effective in IEP meetings. That's why I strongly recommend parents hire a good professional advocate who understands dyslexia. Yes, I know it's hard to find them, but they're worth their weight in gold. So I have included links to 3 sources of advocates in my handout. The next question had to do with accommodations. The question was, what are the typical accommodations that most students with dyslexia should have in their IEP or 504? There are 2 types of accommodations. One type is to prevent them from being embarrassed by revealing their weaknesses to their friends and peers. So those types of accommodations would include things like no reading aloud in class, no exchanging papers with fellow students, no participating in spelling bees, and so forth. The other type of accommodation would allow them to show what they know without print. So those types of accommodations would include things like listening to textbooks on audio, oral testing, where a teacher or an aide asks the question out loud and your student's allowed to answer out loud. Accepting dictated homework and things of that nature. I hope you will take the time to watch my 5-minute video chat called 5 Things All Teachers Should Do. A link to that is on the handout. Another question about accommodations was, will over-accommodating a student with dyslexia make them too dependent? School districts always express concern about over-accommodating students, which they feel will discourage independence with academic tasks. That question drives me crazy. No, accommodations will not make a student lazy. The day they don't need the accommodations anymore, they won't use them. Accommodations provide equal access to the curriculum despite their reading, spelling, and writing challenges. I mean, think about it. Accommodations make things possible. Do eyeglasses, which are a form of accommodation, make a nearsighted person lazy? Is a wheelchair an unfair accommodation that you should get rid of as soon as possible for someone who cannot walk? Yes, that student could probably pull themselves up the stairs without their wheelchair by lying on their stomach and using their elbows, but why would you make them do that? In my experience, the biggest problem with accommodations is not over-accommodating. The biggest problem is getting our students to accept and use accommodations, because most of them would rather fail a course than look different than the other kids. The next question has to do with what to do when a child no longer qualifies for an IEP. The question was, when the school psychologist tells a parent that their child's dyslexia no longer negatively impacts their educational experience, what would you suggest that parents' next step be to get or maintain the accommodations? I recommend, at that point, you ask the school to convert their IEP into a 504 plan so they will continue to get the accommodations that they need. Or, if you feel they really need the services the school provides, then you might want to hire somebody privately to do outside testing to prove there is still an educational impact. The question continued. What tests are typically left out that are more likely to demonstrate how dyslexia continues to affect their academic achievement? Once a child has had the right type of tutoring to improve their reading ability, there will still be lingering deficits because we don't cure dyslexia. We just teach them to read in a way that works for them. So if you want to have proof that there are still lingering deficits, then make sure outside testing tests deeply in one or more of the following areas. Reading fluency, which means speed, is often very difficult to normalize. We can improve it, but we often can't normalize it. Writing fluency, math fluency, written expression, spelling called orthography, the ability to take notes during lecture classes. And those are just a few of the areas that will be impacted and have lingering deficits even when their reading skills get up to grade level. And the right to use assistive technology tools must never be taken away. And of course, the gift of extra time on tests is so important. The next question was about foreign language. The question was, is a foreign language still required in most school districts for a regular high school diploma and by colleges for admission? Or do most colleges accept American Sign Language in place of a foreign language if a student has dyslexia? As Dr. Sally Shaywitz says, considering the profound impact dyslexia has on both spoken and written language acquisition, and from both an educational and a scientific perspective, it makes little to no sense to impose a foreign language requirement on students who are dyslexic. That's why many states now have laws that public schools must accept American Sign Language as a foreign language. If you want a list of those states, or a list of colleges that will allow a foreign language waiver for students with dyslexia, and how to make that happen, send me an email with the subject foreign language. The next question was about current issues for decoding dyslexia. The question was, what are the current or envisioned issues we should be aware of as Decoding Dyslexia Virginia parents? As I understand it from searching the internet and reading up on your state's recent laws, in 2016, a law was passed that all teachers must go through dyslexia awareness training. Well, it's now 2018. Has that training been created? How effective is it? So who creates it? Who governs the content? How is it given? How long is the training? I've seen many states pass laws like that, and the Department of Ed themselves created a 15-minute slideshow that people can click through on their website and then say, yes, we've had training on dyslexia. Dyslexia is far more complex than 15 minutes of training would give you. So if you have laws that require training, pay attention and get involved in who creates the content, what is the content, how is it given, how do you ensure all teachers have actually taken it, how effective is it? According to what I found on the internet, your state claims they've already been screening for dyslexia in kindergarten using PALS. PALS is one that I'm not intimately familiar with. I've heard a lot of people from Virginia don't like it, but I'm not quite sure why. I don't know what it contains, but how is it going? How many of your kids were actually picked up in kindergarten using PALS and told your child has signs of dyslexia? If it's not going well, then that needs to be changed. I know that the Virginia Department of Education has issued a dyslexia guidelines booklet. I actually read through it last night, and many of the things I shared about testing and so on and accommodations are in that guidelines booklet. So it looks like a good guidelines booklet. But guidelines aren't law. Guidelines don't have teeth. They're wishful thinking. They'd like all schools to follow it, but schools are not required to follow guidelines like that. Now you have a new law that was passed in 2017 that says school districts must employ reading specialists who have training in the identification of and appropriate intervention, accommodations, and teaching techniques for students with dyslexia. Well, that sounds great. But where are they going to find those people? Who does the training? Does every single solitary reading specialist have to have that type of training? If so, who's paying for it? That's a big budget item. Who's providing the content? How effective is it? So in general, what I see, regardless of what state it is if a law is passed that is vague, or has no funding, or has no reporting back requirements, and has no penalty for non-compliance, then often it doesn't do much. Now for the final question. The last question was, is there a contact phone number or an email address that a parent or teacher could contact you at if they have additional questions? Of course. At Bright Solutions for Dyslexia, we are a free information and resource center, so all we do all day long is answer questions from parents and teachers trying to help kids with dyslexia. So you are welcome to send me an email, and my email address is susan@brightsolutions.us. Or you can call me. My phone number is 408-559-3652, and I'm available by phone between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. California time, Monday through Friday. And by the way, If you did not get this handout directly from the person, Kelly Shaner, coordinating this webinar, you are welcome to send me an email and ask for it. Just put the subject handout for DDVA, which stands for Decoding Dyslexia Virginia, and I'll be happy to send you the handout myself.